Hey guys, you're listening to episode 129 of the Finish Line podcast, where we discuss the intersection of faith, generosity, and personal finance. My name is Keelan, and I'm here with my co-host and brother Cody, as well as special guest host Julie Wilson from Women Doing Well. Today we're talking to financial advisor Christina Mangino. Christina has 2 decades of experience in financial advising, having worked with hundreds of families in that time. After navigating a complicated multi-generational wealth dynamic in her own family, Christina developed a passion for helping families manage the relational aspects of wealth more effectively. She founded Heart of Generosity to guide families through this process, focusing on the principles of joyful and liberating generosity. You won't want to miss all she had to share. Before we get started, we've spent years speaking to and learning from some of the most passionate givers and leaders in the world. We've distilled down some of the most impactful frameworks, strategies, and tools into short weekly emails that leave you with practical ways you can take your generosity journey to the next level. If you aren't on the list already, you can sign up for free at finishlinepledge.com. And with that, let's get started. All right, we're here today with Christina Mangino. Christina, thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks for having me.
And we also have the fortune to have Julie Wilson with us again as our guest co-host. So Julie, great to have you as always.
Great to see everyone.
All right. So Christina, maybe you can just kick us off telling us a little bit about who you are, maybe some of your early years, including some of your faith background.
Absolutely. So I am a unicorn that was born and raised in Las Vegas, Nevada, who I thought it was normal, but then you get a little older and realize that it's not a normal place to grow up in. But luckily I had 2 great parents who, I still lovingly joke as June and Ward Cleaver, had 50 wonderful years of marriage. I have an older brother. And so we had a pretty traditional Italian upbringing, lots of family and friends around. And we grew up Catholic initially, Italian. So that side of it is where the, ritual of church came in and doing that. But I can't say as a child, I loved going to catechism and, and those things. And it really was about, I think it was about 12. My mom went seeking and ended up at a non-denominational Christian church. And I had 2 youth pastors at the time, just dear to my heart still to this day. And really that's where I fell in love with Jesus and really enjoyed, learning about what a relationship was like and the goodness of him. But sadly, probably about 2 to 3 years in, some stuff had happened with the church and the church broke up. So that was right about when I was entering high school, which is probably the time that I needed it the most. So we really didn't have a church home then. And while it wasn't, to me, I definitely would not say I was following Jesus through my college years and early years, because I did live in Vegas and I had a brother who was a VIP nightlife host. And so anywhere in Vegas I wanted to go, they're like, oh, you're Mangino's sister. Come right in with whoever you want. And, on there. So it wasn't until my early 20s after I started my career and I started actually getting some success as a financial planner that I really could tell there was a void. There was a hole there. And that's when I really refound Jesus. And as an adult, really fell back in love with him and the relationship with him. So that was kind of where I grew up and where I started.
Christina, can you share with us some of your earliest formative memories around money and stewardship?
Yeah. When I think of probably like the first money message that I can remember is when I was 15 and a half, getting my learner's permit. And my family gave me this old 86 Buick Somerset. So it had like this big, oh my God, dashboard. I still laugh about it this day. But it was like, hey, here's a vehicle for you to have, but you got to figure out how to put gas in it and insure it and take care of it. And that was definitely my dad's viewpoint always, where it was like, they always supported you in something, but you still had to have your own skin in the game. And I realized later in life, I just thought that's how it was. But then you start talking to other people where that wasn't how it was. And so for them, they didn't learn how to also, how do you be responsible for things? How do you actually start to be independent? And, as every parent wants to be a self-sustaining individual in there. So that was probably one of the earliest ones that I remember. And also I would say that not very much after that, my dad had my brother and I start Roth IRAs. So pretty much the day we turned 18, and I can't remember, I think his deal was if we put in, I can't remember how much the money was, maybe $50. a month, we didn't have to pay rent as long as we were still in the house. So it's kind of one of those, hey, if you put it into a Roth, you don't have to pay rent. It was a great deal for me. I'm like, oh, this is way cheaper. But it also really, at an early age, just taught that natural habit because you start seeing it grow and you're like, oh, and so it just became this like thing that was just like, oh, this is so exciting. Let's keep doing this.
Yeah, I can't imagine how you ended up becoming a financial advisor. That's a great foundation early on. Now, you mentioned during some of those early financial advising years, you kind of had this second encounter with Jesus where kind of formative in your faith background. I'm curious where along the way God really started to plant seeds of generosity or kind of reframing your view of money in the context of faith. Where did that kind of come in along the way?
Yeah, I would say there's probably a few things. One, I did a leadership class early on that basically we had this project midway through the leadership class where we had to each raise $2,500 for a charity. And I just remember like at the time, it wasn't that it was hard, but I was the person that was usually helping others. So for me, like I could have afforded just to pay for it myself. So I remember though, like the joy that when I actually was asking people to donate and how people were just so excited and so ready and, oh, tell me more and tell me about the cause. And like when I saw the excitement in them, I was like, oh, wait a minute. It's not just about getting to the result and putting the money in. It's actually about allowing people to go on the journey. And the same thing happened when I was going to Haiti on a mission trip where they actually required, I shouldn't say they required, but they highly, highly encouraged you not to pay your own way. So same thing at the time where I'm like, oh, it'd just be so much easier just to pay for it. But really inviting people on the journey. And then they started asking about Haiti. They started asking about the cause, and then when I'm getting back, they're like, tell me about, and so I just realized how many people, because of, they had a family at home or young children, or they just didn't have the ability to take the time and go to Haiti and do it, that they really enjoyed being on the journey. And kind of like the old adage, people live vicariously through things. But I realized even in those type of scenarios, people were even more excited to be able to have a part in that role when they weren't physically able to go do it themselves.
I wanted to share a quick story. You just reminded me of something that's really stuck with me. Right after college, I was my first year working and I decided to go on a trip through my church. And it was the same situation where it's, hey, you could pay for it yourself, but you're going to miss out on some of the benefit of inviting others into what you're doing. And I really didn't want to do that. I asked a few people, I was able to get the money together, and I kind of put it off to the last minute. But after I got back from my trip, I was telling one of my coworkers who I worked very closely with about the trip, and he knew I was going. And he said, hey, can I stop you for a second? I said, oh, okay. And he said, why didn't you ever ask me for money? I was like, I just assumed you wouldn't. He goes, I would have given you money. You just never asked. It just really stuck with me. It just reminded me of that story. But Christina, can you share a little bit about your personal experience with managing money in a family context?
Yeah. So kind of piggybacking, yes, I had a Roth early on and those kind of habits, but I also was, had the privilege of it pretty much when I was 18. My brother got me a job as a server in a fine dining restaurant. I was an Emeril Lagasse restaurant in Vegas. So at 18, I'm making quite a good amount of money then. So it became, I don't want to say it became addictive, but it was like I was maxing out my Roth and I was paying off my car and I'm buying a house while everybody else is in college struggling. And I did end up having that experience because I did end up going away to college. So I had the top ramen experience, while I was in college a little bit. But then I came back and finished college. By that point, I was 21 serving. So really early on, I had the ability to have extra discretionary income, which at a young age, I think really foundationally shaped me. But I also remember, because being in Vegas, a lot of the other servers, everybody wanted to come get my shifts. Because I'm in college, so I'm always giving away shifts. But I remember calculating how much I needed to pay for the house, pay for the Roth, pay for everything. And I can't remember, maybe it was like $124 a night or something like that. So I always knew everything above and beyond that was my like fun money. And where everybody else, they would go spend the whole night's money and then they're coming back trying to get somebody's shift. And so like just seeing people and I'm going like, wait a minute, we're all making the same money. You guys are working more days than I am. What's the difference here? And just realizing those, just little nuances of just planning. You just have a plan for your money. And I still enjoyed it. I still got to have discretionary money. So I would say that was definitely one way that I definitely learned, but also kind of on the opposite side where I'm trying to think what year it was, but my father actually had a gentleman where he worked on this project for years. And they had a piece of land out by the Air Force Base in Vegas, and they were going to actually build a hotel casino on it. And my dad was more of the one that was working for a smaller percentage. And then the other one was the financial. And they had, years and years, and they're about to come to fruition. And that partner passed away. And he was from the Philippines, and his entire estate went into probate. So then I watched and I didn't even actually think about this until probably, 5 to 8 years ago that it came to my mind. And I'm like, of course that shaped me in my, my financial life of I forget about that because that was before in financial planning, but watching my dad who had poured his heart and soul into this project. And then the family members were, he had to basically, fight for at least just his portion, but also remember watching the family all just go crazy because no one knew where everything was. No one knew where things had. I think they spent 5 to 8 years in probate with what they went through. So I remember going through that experience as well. And then I would say the other financial experience that shaped me is when I first got into financial planning, I had the person that had brought me into the business. I didn't know it in the beginning, but he didn't have a business bank account. He wasn't running it like a business. He just knew how much he had to sell every month to take care of his family. So I was also learning some habits from him. And so my first couple of years, it was 2005 when I got in, everything was easy. Everything was great. Everything's doing great. And so we had started doing seminars, but the seminars were very costly. So I went into a large amount of debt early on the first several years in the industry because I wasn't making enough money to barely live myself, let alone enough money to support my lifestyle and the debt. So then when 2008 hit, it just rocked my world. And I ended up my condo at the time where I actually rented it out and went and lived with my parents for 8 months because it was kind of do I continue down this path in financial planning or do I go back and get a job? But I just remember that experience. It was that slave to the lender. And when you think of that, it's I just didn't know what I didn't know because I was listening to, and not that I may or may not have done it differently because I still have a lot of those clients 18 years later. And they're still with me. So it's not necessarily, but I just remember wow, that was not a really good financial decision. And so it really allowed me to not bet on the future in the same way. Not that I don't take calculated risks, but really being able to see that because, that 2008 year, while it was hard for everybody, well, then it's here I am also in my financial foundation feeling wait a minute, here I am the financial planner. And now I'm having to rent out my house and live with my parents. And then in hindsight, my father had a quadruple bypass during those 8 months and I was able to be home. And so I was okay, Lord, I get it. I know there's always some other lessons in here. But I would say a lot of those early on lessons really, really shaped, especially having that so early on in my financial planning career. I just viewed myself and for my clients, what it really means that it's easy in the good times, to plan and make sure everything's well. But are you prepared for those valleys when they come, because, at any point in time, COVID hits, something happens, are we prepared for shifts for the good and the bad financially?
I'm curious, Christina, living through the 2008 crisis, how did you approach generosity in that season? Because I think business owners go through lean times and, it affects their family, but it affects their giving as well. Do you have any wisdom from that season on how to approach giving?
And to be honest, at the time I was 25 to 28 years old. So I would say at the time, my generosity looked more like I had a compassion child that I sponsored every month. So it was, definitely on a lot smaller scale back then. So yeah, I think in the leaner times, it goes back to, because even later on, there was a season where I remember just saying, all right, Lord, I'm not sure I have my tithe plus my extra giving that I planned for. And it was having that, but I'm going to give it in faith. And it really brought me out of that season. And that was for that second time, going through that. It wasn't quite the same valley, but it's still, you get to different levels and you still have those different lessons. And I remember the second time is when it really cemented of, oh, yes, if I just continue to provide faithful, regardless what's going on, he's going to provide. And really at that point in time, I think that was more, that was probably like 12, 14 years ago, that in that moment was when I was like, okay, it is his, like, just give it consistently, and he'll provide. And I've really, since then, I've never had a day where I've actually questioned or worried about money. I've never questioned or worried about if it's going to be there, if I'm going to have it, if there's enough. So this is the second time because it was a little more zeros behind it. It was a different journey, but that's where I would say my faith really shifted in a different direction where, hey, it's going to be there. And if it's not, he's going to provide. Like, whatever it is, it's his. So why am I worrying about it? But I think, I think when I think of families now, as they go through the peaks and valleys, it's like anything. Sometimes they may have to reprioritize, because if there's less to give, there's less to give. If they're having a year where they're not having as much earnings that they may be, if they're doing 50% or they do it at percentage basis, the numbers may be less, but the principles are still there. So I would just say it's in those moments that I feel that that's where he really takes our heart and cements of like, hey, we're going to go through these peaks and valleys throughout life. And these are the times that I'm really looking to check your heart a little extra, because it's easy to give when it's easy, but it's harder to give when there's more things in the environment going on. And so I think sometimes, that's when he wants us to be most generous, and not necessarily in giving more, but in those times when it's not as easy.
Yeah, definitely. I think the stretch itself, kind of just like, working out muscles, is really what forces us to be actively in conversation with God, and that's really, I think, what he's after. He's after our hearts in all of it. In the end, he doesn't really need our money. He's done plenty without any of our money in the past. And so, he's after us.
And I would even add to that one question that sometimes I'll ask is, if things have gotten a little harder for you and you have a little more resources, how much harder do you think it is for someone with not as many resources currently? Mm-hmm. So it's probably even more of a need when resources are tight, because if they're tight at the top level, they're really tight, and those that are kind of living paycheck to paycheck.
Yeah, I think COVID was a great example of that, because everybody felt it, but there was definitely people who were like instantly out of work, supporting 5 kids and whatever. And really to see the generosity in that season, like the really core early COVID days, was really pretty amazing to watch, because people just came out of the woodwork, Christians, non-Christians alike, to support their own neighbors, like literally on their block, people at their church and stuff, exactly like what you're talking about. Everybody felt it, but people knew that if I'm feeling it, probably there's an even layer deeper that others are feeling. Now, you've had a lot of different experiences in your own life, and also as a planner have watched and walked with many other families along the way. I'm curious if you have found any helpful strategies in giving, both in terms of figuring out how much to give in any given season, and also where to give, and how to kind of walk through having some kind of a plan on that front.
Yeah, I think my view is going to be maybe a little different than others, in the sense of that really at the end of the day, you've got to have the relationship strengthened. And I think that most people, they're looking at the plan, the strategy, the how, and which that's all important as well. But I found through my own family's journey, 10, 11 years ago, I became our family trustee. I'm the youngest in the family. So I actually was taking care of 2 sets of grandparents, parents, and then some shared real estate my brother and I had with them. And really, in the first part of it was like, great, this is really no big deal. We're all coming together. We're doing things. But then as health started to shift our family, my father started going through pulmonary fibrosis. My grandmother had lung cancer. I had another grandparent going into hospice. And so really in those times, we realized that none of that is as important as our relationships. So our relationships at the time really started relationally strained. My dad's looking at life a little differently. So really, that's when I really learned of where our relationships, because when I had to go seek, I really had to go find a facilitator, because I needed to be a daughter at the table. and do that. And so through that journey, I really realized how important our relational health is in our families. And what I mean by that is when our relational health is strong, then the giving strategies are so much better because we can communicate differently. We can communicate why something's important to us. We can actually have critical conversations when people aren't agreeing on how we should do it or what we should do it. So I think a lot of times with the giving strategies, sometimes the underlying root from that is that the relational health it hasn't made it been a priority. That everybody plans for the financial priorities and the financial health, but are they planning for the relational health and strength, but also, being able to allow everybody to be uniquely who they are and who God made them. And I'm the unique one in my family that I'm a high lion. I'm that controller. I'm the one that wants to handle everything and do everything. My father was very much that golden retriever, peacemaker, supporter. So when you look at some of the dynamics, we can see then now we take in my brother who got the bike and I didn't get the bike when we were 12. You start taking all these layers in there and you start to realize that in order to make these decisions, we have to be relationally healthy and intentional. So I think for me, the first foundation into any strategies, giving and what you're doing is one, to put some priorities in place to make sure the relationships and the relational health of the family are an open space where everybody feels safe, everybody can share. And then from there, it becomes fun because one, you know each other's heart, you know each other who uniquely they are, you know our personality styles, you know our love languages. So now you've got some family members who are quality time. They're probably going to have giving strategies that include quality time with whoever they're giving to, quality time with those organizations or that impact, where you may have family members who, if they're words of affirmation, they're going to want to actually hear the impact and they're going to want to see the reports and And so how everybody is uniquely wired a little bit differently also then is how their giving is shaped. So then, now you can actually make connective ways to have giving strategies around your family's love languages and how you're connected and how you want to give. And if majority of your quality time, well, then actually doing maybe a mission trip or actually going to see the nonprofit and taking them to lunch or really being able to shape around what our hearts desire and then creating giving strategies from there, I think also is fun. Even one that I really love is especially with the younger generations. So I have some families where they actually will have the younger generation go research who they want to give to. So they'll say, hey, you guys are going to have, this amount per this year. I need you to go pick 3 places you want to give it, and you have to tell us why. So it's not just go find the name of somebody, but why is that important to you? Why do you want to give to them? So that I've seen a lot of fun fruit out of, because now it's a research project almost in school for them, but it actually makes the children have to think a little deeper of why is that important to them? Why do I want to help them? Versus, oh yeah, so-and-so gives to that, so I'm just going to say this name, and it's really, really fun because then you see some of them who actually come up with Johnny in their class whose dad lost their job and, they really want to bless that family because they don't have a mom at home like I do, and so they start to then also realize the need and connecting their heart to the need.
Christina, as you were sharing about the importance of relationships, there's a real vulnerability to what you're digging into. And I find it so interesting in your stewardship journey, there's money that you're managing in accounts with your name on it. And then there's money that you're managing with other people's names on it as a financial planner. And then as your experience as a family trustee is kind of separate from those two because you are affected and it's not a relationship that you probably want to walk away from. Like if a client was upset and they left, that would be disappointing, but it's totally different with family. There's a different level of, I guess, accountability and risk
to
it's
personal
managing.
I mean, it's
exactly,
so personal for me because, and it was a really interesting dynamic because I realized that I now started to play a role that most people don't play in their family. I am now the one everybody's coming to fix things, to reconcile things, to plan things, but I'm planning for them individually as a family unit and then us as a whole as a family unit. So yeah, it was definitely, it was a unique perspective that, of course, the Lord brings us through everything. And in the time, I'm like, what is going on? And now I'm like, oh, it's because family is really, really, it's so needed. I mean, it's so needed because what's the point of going through everything, putting all the structures together, having a legacy, having a giving plan and doing it. And right now, 85% of the families end up not talking, disconnected and fighting. And what family members, set to have a legacy of their family disconnected 10 years from now?
Yeah, so you have a passion for living generously, and it's simpler to do that with money that you are solely in charge of. And then with a client, you can walk alongside a client in that journey, and they may or may not feel the same way that you do with regards to financial generosity. But within the family trustee role, I'm curious, did you find there were competing priorities, specifically when it came to generosity? Was that something that there was alignment around, or did it even provide something that everyone could work together on, or was that kind of a sticking point?
Yeah. And just to be, like our family wasn't quite at a place where we were doing group philanthropy. We weren't doing group giving. So our family still had everybody had their own journey through that. And so it looked a little different. So on my mom and dad's side, it was a little different. And my dad was, a little bit old school, where he was very much of, this is my tithe, this is my 10%, I gave my 10%. And then my mom's on the other side of that of going, oh my gosh, the quarterly project at church is, helping some of the homeless. And oh my gosh, I want to give an extra. So part of it was actually helping the two of them learn where it's like, okay, how does my mom get to be more generous? And my dad not feeling, and really helping them actually walk through that. So it was more of a facilitation with them of having them understand each other, which came back to relationship. It's just kind of like in them, it wasn't, they had a great relationship in marriage, but it was like they had different opposing views on generosity. So it was helping them come together. And then I've got my grandma on the other side who's, I joke sometimes, she's 91 and she came from, the Depression era. So when it comes to her own life, she's like rewashing baggies. And I'm like, Grandma, why are you putting plastic in the dishwasher and washing baggies? But then when it comes to generous, I mean, she'd give everything away. You know what I mean? And so she's very, very generous in, not just her time, but also with her treasure. And she loves to be generous. But then for her, it's like sometimes of like, okay, but you also get to like have new fresh Ziploc bags. No, I'm just kidding. But it's like, but it's also helping. Like my grandma was fun because she has a lot of places, but also helping her discover some new places that were really touching her heart. Like she's from North Carolina. So she wanted to really help some of that disaster recovery, but didn't know really where to start. And she, outside of giving to one of a big name, she wanted to have more of a direct impact. And she really has a heart. She's a big sports fanatic. Raiders, Rebels. I mean, they've been a Rebels fan for 40 years. And I'm like, thank goodness they're having one good season. They made the top 25 twice. You know what I mean? Like, hallelujah, Jesus, But for her, it's like she loves helping the athlete that's also, maybe didn't come from the same family background and helping them, so it's just helping. To me, it's whoever it is, whether it's the group or not, it's alignment of the heart. Like what makes that heart want to is getting a reciprocal joy out of giving and not feeling like they're giving just because they should give. And that was part of my own journey. Like it was very easy for me to go, okay, I should do this and let me do this. But it was really when I found things that actually my heart just can't wait to do more and can't wait to help more. Like I realized that for me was where the real joy came in, because it's that's where the Lord's placing on my heart, and it makes you want to do more and be blessed with more to give more.
So Christina, I know that you later went on to found Heart for Generosity, and I'd love to hear some of the framework for how God was kind of laying the foundation to build up to that, and then what that looks like today.
Yeah. So for Heart of Generosity really is the culmination of my journey with my family on the relational side of being the family trustee and realizing here I have this deep background of financial, technical, legal, estate planning. And if I was about to jump off the bridge and say, forget it all, let's dismantle it all, there's no amount of trinkets in the world that matter that could have been my dad's last couple of years of life. And also on the flip side of that, I just have always loved personality profiles. You know what I mean? I just love the communication and the emotional intelligence side of that. So if I have that deep background and I'm going crazy, well, no wonder the statistics are what they are today. So as I went to go look for resources, I couldn't find any. I mean, I'd find a couple attorneys here and there that would do like mission, vision, values work, but I couldn't find anybody to really help my family not just make a great mission statement and put it on a shelf, but what are the tools for us to actually be able to communicate well and do that. So as I went looking for it, I finally found one couple who created a process that is a certified relational wealth advisors. And they were actually been doing this process for 15 years with successful families. And it really is facilitating the families if you're reintroducing them to each other, letting them get to know each other, personality profiles, love languages, how to have safe conversations, but how to also know what's important and process the relational impact of major decisions. So it was really through my own journey that I said, okay, there's enough of us out there. There's a lot of great financial planners out there, but I had not found a lot of people willing to walk the relational journey with families. And for me, they're completely separate journeys. I don't ever wear the hat on one versus the other. So if I'm a financial planner for a family, which I only have a few families I currently walk with, but if I'm wearing that hat, I will not be the relational planner. So if I'm on the opposite side, if I'm the relational planner, I'm not going to be involved in any way of I'm not going to manage their assets or do you know what I mean? And do that. Now I'm going to help them facilitate conversations. And I have a unique view from what my experiences has been. But I really found my heart realizes like, wow, if I can just even help families redirect 1% to the kingdom, that's a massive impact. I mean, just for me, it was the picture of it. If we now have families that are deeply connected and excited to work together and excited to do things together, like how much more impact are they going to create versus following what the legal document says and what that is, and also having to convince them to come be part of the journey. So for me, I just found like that was really a need that was not being served. There's very few of us. I think there's now 6 of us certified in the process. And of course, when I started, I'm like, wait a minute, but I'm not married with children. Lord, you want me to go in here and help these families? And then, of course, a few of them are like, hey, you were part of the family. You were the one that went through this. You walked this journey, like you were, and I was like, oh, yeah, you're right. I do have a unique perspective. But we all know families are amazing and complicated and they can be messy. But a lot of times is the messiness just because no one's ever taught us the tools to be able to communicate well, appreciate each other for our unique differences, and also stand up for what we want and come together in unity, And so when you look at those, there's not a roadmap, there's no exact book, because we're all unique individuals who had unique upbringings, unique family lives. And so, yeah, that to me makes me excited. If I can help families not go through what my family went through and feel frustrated and feel, especially in the midst of your family members looking death's door down. So to help families gracefully walk through those transitions, that to me is a true impact and a true legacy that I want to leave.
That's like such a great picture of how God redeems the pain of our past by helping us give to others in a more sacrificial way that becomes joyful to us, because there's this beautiful redemption story happening for us and this beautiful generosity and connection to God for the receiver. So I love that. I'm curious how you got into what I would define now as the generosity space. It's quite large. There's many organizations, but what was your introduction into meeting other Christians who had your radical view of the power of generosity?
Yeah, I mean, I know the moment when I started meeting people in the space, but really I was in the thick of it with my family. My dad went on oxygen full time in 2018. So I was in the thick of it in that year. And so in 2019 was actually the first time that I went to a Kingdom Advisors conference. And I'd been a Kingdom Advisor. I'd been certified for many years, but just never took the time to fly across the country and go. And it was the first one I went, and they had like an optional pre-workshops. And one was like faith-based investing. And I'm like, yeah, definitely don't want to do that. So I opted for one. I think it was called legacy planning or something. But it wasn't like intentional, like, oh, I really want to go. But then I go and everybody's having these conversations. It was the first time I'd been in a room where people are having relational conversations about the relational side of successful families and money and generosity. So when I really was sitting, I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I can't believe people are talking about this. So one, it was a need that was in my heart at the moment, because you go and you're realizing, okay, we're doing all of this, but for what purpose? Like, I know the initial reasons we started, and there was different views in the family and what we're doing. And while I know there's been some great blessings in it as we've lost family members and not having my grandmother, who never even dealt with the money, have to go through and change you know what I mean? So there's like logistical things. But when you really look at, like, I was just in the thick of it, where it's like, my dad and I are struggling. He's on oxygen full time. I'm the one managing it. And like, but also I was 33 when we started this. And so when I actually think back and I'm like, wow, all of a sudden at 33, I had all this pressure where I'm taking care, you know what I mean? I'm the one everybody's looking to drive this. So it was in that room that it started. And it was like some of the great names of, so Bill High, who, deals with the Hobby Lobby family. And I remember listening to one of his talks, and I remember I wanted to go talk to him, but any workshop, everybody rushes the speaker afterwards. And I was like, oh, I have so many questions. So I went in the coffee shop and I'm working, doing some emails. And all of a sudden he walks in and I see him walk by, and I was like, oh my gosh, here's my chance. Well, he turned around and saw me and came over to me and talked to me. And I was like, okay, Lord, that was weird. You know what I mean? It was one of those moments where I was like, oh my gosh. And I got to have some great conversations with him, and doing that same one is when I met John Reinhardt from Gospel Patrons, which I read that and I was like, oh my gosh. Because for me, it's been an interesting journey with the Lord, being single, not married with children. And I literally became a financial planner so I could be married and stay home with my kids and still bringing income in for the family. So it's like, it's always been this joke where I was like, okay, Lord, well, I created that, just didn't have, so it's always been this dance with the Lord in my own journey. So part of that was like, okay, well, the more successful I got, the more intimidating men were of me, because, frankly, I started making more money than most men. And I'm in these conversations about trust and estate planning, these technical conversations. And like, guys would kind of be like, whoa. So that book, Gospel Patrons, and just every time John speaks, I always just get such beautiful messages where it made me realize, no, I have I don't want to call it a duty, but I have and I'm just going to use the word duty for not having a better word, to be the one, because someone's going to make the money, someone's going to be successful, but do they have the heart to steward that money? So like, that's been a really fun dance with a lot of business owners that I talk with, because everybody has sometimes these mixed messages of like, oh, too much money is greedy, too much money is this, money is the root of all evil. And when you help them see like, hey, do you have a heart that's going to steward that money better than someone else? So you actually need to be you know what I mean? Like, hey, how about, you be the one that's going to actually be created to have a bigger impact. And so that's been really fun to shift my own heart of like, no, being more successful, it's not like I'm going to like alienate myself. It actually was like, no, I'm going to actually have a bigger impact, because if the Lord's blessing me with my talents to be able to do this, I'm going to have a bigger impact. And so that's been really fun as well. One day I met some great, and that's where I also met Eric and Jennifer Garcia, who were the ones that created the relational wealth process. And it was the same thing where they came up and gave a presentation, and I was just like, oh my gosh, here is a process to be able to. And so that was actually what revolutionized my family, is because I basically jumped in his certification right away and doing that, and be able to learn how to, let's learn who each other are. We learned our love languages. All of us had gifts as 0. So we stopped doing Christmas gifts. And then we started doing dinners together because we're all quality time, and so it's just learning your love languages for us was very simple. So that's really where I would say it started for me. And it's just, I don't know, the Lord it's always made sense to me. And it's, sometimes you just don't know, but it's like, he just kind of, like, for me, it's always made sense. And I think it's freeing, because when you're building, it just feels very self-serving sometimes. But when you're being very generous, now all of a sudden you're like, wow, oh my gosh, I can help with that. Oh my gosh. For me, it just became very fun and exciting to continue to help others, because I think most of us have an existential point, some point in our life, where we realize, okay, we've made enough money to provide for our needs. And then we go, is this it? You know what I mean? And so without that deeper meaning and deeper purpose, well, then it just feels like trying to hit something that will never be achieved. Like you're seeking something. And that's really, I think back to the earlier part of like at 28, when I came back to Jesus, it was because I started making enough money and took care of the financial piece. And I looked around and I was like, well, why am I still unfulfilled and not happy? And it was really because I wasn't living my life for Jesus. It was because I was just, my only goal was to make more money. Because you get out of college and it's like, you just need to make money. And that became the only goal. That was a big piece of where my heart shifted.
Yeah, so I was so glad that you mentioned Bill High. I was actually thinking about him as you were talking. All the things that you're passionate about and that you care about, I'm like, I bet you would get along really well with Bill High. So it's so funny that you brought him up. We were fortunate enough to have the chance to talk to Bill back on episode 103 for anybody that wants to hear more of his story and what he's all about. Also, John Reinhardt, another fantastic voice in the generosity space. We were able to have him back on episode 52 if anybody wants to just hear more about gospel patrons and all they have going on there. So God was obviously setting a lot in motion all in this season to prepare you for what he had planned. I was wondering if you could kind of walk us through, you mentioned earlier, like, what if I could even just redirect 1% towards the kingdom from some of these families? When you're engaging with a new family who's like, hey, we're all over the place, we need to kind of pull some of this together. In your head, what's kind of the process that you're thinking, okay, these are the milestones that I want to get a family through in order to take them from where they're starting now to where we're actually really starting to have a focused purpose and impact, and like God can really start to get some things in motion?
To be honest, it's not about me. So really, we have a process that really, it's a year-long process that families go on where they're, like I mentioned, getting to know each other. And really, God just shows up and does all the work past that. Because I realize once that they have the ability to learn each other, know each other, have critical conversations, everything else just kind of flows. And sometimes it's as simple as they just need a family policy statement put into place. But in order to even get to a place to have a family policy statement, but when successful families have the vacation home where anybody in the family can go use it, well, what's the policies to go use it? How do you have to leave it? Who's coordinating what? So when there are benefits of the family, when they're doing life together and doing things together, like what are those policies? When someone gets married, what's the so when there's more you're dealing with and it does become a lot more to steward, well, then it's like sometimes it's just a matter of creating a family policy or a family generosity plan or a family, plan together of how that goes forward. And so it's not every time where it's a new discussion. It's not like, okay, Johnny's getting married. What is XYZ? Okay, now they want to, the grandkids want to start using the summer home. Okay, who's, making sure that the power got turned off or, you know what I mean? And so there's all these little nuances sometimes that sometimes just by getting them on the same playing field relationally and enjoying each other, a lot of times then you can put stuff into place. Well, now it kind of takes all the wondering, because it's kind of like even when you have a young family who's not done a trust, doesn't have life insurance, but they know they should. And it keeps them up at night, but then, they don't want to like, oh, I don't want to think about death. And I don't want, they don't want to sometimes like go through that process. But once they have the process in place, it's like, oh, they're freed up to actually be able to think about other things. And I think even when it's magnified, when there's a lot more that they're dealing with, it's like there's all these unknowns that like mom's wondering about, dad's wondering about, okay, when am I going to retire? Who's taking over the business? What am I doing? Okay, well, what if Johnny marries somebody and like he wants a divorce? There's all these things that people are thinking about the what ifs. So I think a lot of times when you give them the foundation to one, have a place to have authentic conversations, critical conversations in a safe place to feel seen, heard, and loved. And, when you give them that foundation, it's almost like now they're just able to do it because now when they come to talk about generosity, they have the tools to have the conversations. So now it makes it easier to have the conversations, but also they're not fearing about what happens if this happens. Well, what happens if we lose a partner? Well, all those things. And that sometimes to me doesn't thrive generosity because when you're sometimes so worried about the foundational pieces and things, it's like you're not doing X, Y, or Z out of fear of, you know what I mean? And so I think sometimes when you give them the tools to be able to make those conversations flow from a different place, God just shows up and it just starts changing it. Because then now they are connected, they are, working together in unison versus feeling like sometimes they're fighting each other or having competing. Well, I need to talk about this over here, but you need to talk about this. And so for me, I just see where it just naturally then creates the space where it just happens on its own. Now, sometimes we are having to give them ideas and work through things to be able to have different impacts. But some of that also comes into giving them the tools to, how do I know if a nonprofit's viable? How do I know if my gift's going to be enough or my gift's not going to hurt that, organization versus help the organization? And do I know the people in the organization? How do I vet the organization? Or, so I think sometimes it's also, sometimes they do need some just things and strategies to process to know that we now have the capacity to give more and do more. But I think when their hearts get aligned, I think God shows up and does the rest.
Well, Christina, God has clearly given you a lot of opportunities and a passion to pour into others, but he's also leading you on another adventure of your own. Can you share about the Miracle Hope Foundation?
Absolutely. So like everything, through my own journey, 2017, I got in a car accident and got a severely herniated L5S1 and was scheduled for surgery. And I had some dear friends at the time who had started a alternative cancer hospital in Tijuana, Mexico. And I had talked to the two of the owners separately in like a same week, and I hadn't even been talking to them regularly. And they both said, push your surgery off and come down here and let us heal you. I'm like, you're a cancer hospital. You're in Tijuana. You want me to, I've been working in a lawn chair in my living room for months. Like, you want me? And they're like, yes, which luckily it was the best decision I made. So that was 2017. So they healed my back without surgery. And then even in 2021, they started doing stem cell therapy. So I had stem cells injected into my disc as well. Also along this journey, I had a partially torn an ACL in my knee and healed it in 2.5 months with stem cells as well. So through this journey, I just fell in love with their mission, their hospital. I mean, when you spend 2 weeks with cancer patients and you're watching them from the first Gerson certified hospital. And so when you're watching patients just from a nutrition protocol as well, like literally seeing life come back into them. And then they had these really cool classes called Power of the Mind, where, I still remember vividly this 18-year-old girl who is passionately sharing how she knows God gave her cancer because she has brought so many people to the Lord, and it's been her testimony. I get chills even when I still think of it in the room, where it's like there's not a dry eye in the room because you're like, you're 18 fighting cancer and you're super convicted that, Lord, this is your testimony to bring people to Jesus. So it was just this incredible place of healing. Throughout all those, I joke that I was the only home cooked meal the guys would get sometimes. So I'd always come down for a couple days, cook meals, but we'd sit around a table because 95% of the patients that were calling on the cancer side to get down there to fight for their life couldn't afford to get there, couldn't afford to spend the 3 weeks. And so there was a lot of need. And we said, man, what would it be like to make finances not be a barrier for those that need to fight for their life, but also to understand what options are out there in healing. So it was also, okay, we all had businesses. Someone will do it someday. And then actually in 2022, and it's funny because actually this comes back to Bill High. He actually helped. He was actually, I forgot, he was on this journey early where I was just looking for a strategy for them because the patients started funding each other. You're watching family members who got 5 extra years of amazing years out of a terminal diagnosis. So when they did lose a loved one, they're like, can we pay it forward to help somebody else fight? So naturally it started helping. And so I was just like, can we do a donor advised fund? Can we, how can we do it so administratively? And Bill helped us find an option for patients to be able to fundraise and stuff. And we still had to have a 501c3. And during this journey, my father also now is diagnosed with cancer. And my father was immune compromised. So I couldn't bring my father down to Tijuana because he had to risk rejecting his lung because everything there is immune building and he would have had to risk. So it was just, I'm in also the journey with my dad and a little other unique, and we're getting his DNA sequencing and gene mapping and doing this. So I'm in the fight as well. So during that time, I thought I was just going to be kind of more of a consultant, helping them in the journey. And then we get to the part where we're kind of deciding who's going to do it. And we're at dinner and all 3 of them are like, well, because we have some goals that, they're like, hey, it's probably better for us. We're the ones running our hospital. You know what I mean? Like, we were being advised, and I'm like, well, who's going to do it? And they all look at me and I'm like, I love you and I hate you, but also, so I was like, I'll get you started. And I'll be the foundational piece, and then we'll hire somebody, a real person. But through that journey, the Lord has just continuing to show up in such amazing ways. So our first, we had a gentleman come to us who was a veteran. He was the first responder in 9/11 who was getting pulmonary fibrosis, which is the disease my father had before his lung transplant. So he came down and got stem cells a year ago and now has almost no remnants left on his scans. He has a couple small ones that he's like, yeah, one more round, it should be done. So that was the first where I was like, I knew the Lord had me, because I'm like, you're going to tell me that I can potentially save other families for not going through that long journey with my dad and what we went through, which was just incredible. And then there's just been some really other just amazing initiatives that every time I'm like, oh Lord, what am I doing here? He just continues to just bring people and resources. So I've learned, okay, Lord, I make plans and you tell me what the plans are, but he's just showed up in so many ways. So yeah, so really Miracle Hope Foundation, we are dedicated to helping veterans heal their bodies from the physical pain of service injuries. Anybody that has a veteran in their life knows that most of them are living in an 8 out of 10 pain daily. Invasive surgery tend to be their only option. And within 6 months, they're at a 3 and below of daily pain. And they come in with a quality of life of 3 and below, and all of them now report a 7 and above quality of life within 6 months. I have a grandfather who was a commander in the Navy, but really never heard much about his Navy service. So I've gotten a really unique view of just, people that have been sacrificing their life for our freedom, that now their bodies are just, there's low quality of life, high pain. So that's been just really, really amazing to help support them. And then the hospital's been in a full remodel. And so the cancer program will come back first quarter next year. So we'll be able to do some really amazing things, also helping cancer patients fight, but also being on the diagnostic side on the forefront. They've built the world's most advanced genomics lab. So yeah, so it's been a really, really fun. We're so much on the generosity side is like, who am I going to support? But now I'm getting this other view of what it's like to be the nonprofit and help. So really, this is what John Reinhardt calls when you really put your time, talent, and treasures in one place. And for me, it's also really, really shown me that when my heart's aligned with the mission of how much more impact we have. Because a lot of the things I've given to, it's like, yeah, I can see the need and I can see it. But this one, like I did lose my dad in April of 23. So this has been a really great healing journey for me, because I get to talk about Daddy all the time. I get to talk about his stories and just his legacy, grandma's journey with stage 4 cancer, my own healing journey. So not only has it been such a personal healing journey, but it's just the excitement of being able to help others in this way is far surpassed being able to just financially be generous.
Yeah, you're right. It's very different being on all the different sides of this. And you really have quite the comprehensive view of all the different aspects that go into generosity, just from living your life and in having been a part of all that you have.
Well, and I have definitely also now a different perspective, because I used to be the one being like, how much are they spending on admin and what's going to admin? And now I'm like, how do these nonprofits do it on 10%? Like anybody that's under 10%, man, they're like, you know what I mean? Like you start, especially when you're building. So I have a whole new perspective where I used to be the one on the other side, like wanting them to be so efficient, which we do. And also realizing like, that's not easy.
Yeah. Probably a good exercise for every giver to, start a nonprofit for a little while, just to kind of.
So, Christina, it's unique to be a single woman in a male-dominated business, and also in generosity. Oftentimes, the big givers traditionally are men. So, tell us a little bit about how you have found your way and found community for your own journey of generosity.
Yeah, I mean, that definitely has been a journey with the Lord, for sure, because I have always desired to be in partnership, be in marriage, have children, and have a family. So it's definitely been a unique journey, but also leaning into realizing that the Lord really is using me in such amazing ways. So part of that journey may be that maybe the story is not done being written. And also if, he's using me in other ways. for me, getting to find joy in that journey. So one of the ways is obviously through Women Doing Well. John Reinhardt, Gospel Patrons, had invited me to one of the gatherings last year. I think it's about 2.5 days. But I mean, within 2.5 days, I was like, wow, you're going to tell me there's other women, not all single, but other women who love Jesus, are doing really, really well, have a heart for generosity, but also show up completely authentic. Like that was just such a gift for me. And really for me, it was probably one of the first groups I'd ever been in that I felt really, truly seen. So actually going through, I think it's now been, a little over a year that I've been in the community, but it's just amazing how everyone, it's like, there's no apology for being successful. There's no apology for being single. There's no, you know what I mean? It's just kind of like, this is who you are. Like, I want to know more. But also a place where we come together and we share the heartaches and the things that, and so for me, that's been a really, really amazing community that I have found, because I'm finding more and more, especially in our families, there usually is one of me in there, where some women are getting married later. Some women are just, for whatever reason, the Lord's got them in a longer, single season and doing that, but also that we just have this deep passion for helping others, inspiring hope and in generosity. And so like sometimes we feel like we're the anomaly a little bit. Yeah. So for me, it's like, it's finding that community of people, but also, I still get to have the deep desire of my heart, but also on the flip side of getting to enjoy the journey the Lord has me on. And whatever his journey is for me, it's his journey. And I think it's all of our faith walk, because we all have that piece somewhere in our faith walk that we've been praying for, we've been hoping for, we've been asking for. We're like, okay, Lord, you give me all these other areas. Why is this one? But it's part of the Lord's journey to say, do you trust me? And do you have faith that, it's all part of my plan? But also I think, a lot of times I look and say, but because I don't have a family and children, I do have so much extra capacity to help. And so some people are like, where do you get all this time? And I said, well, right now it's like helping other families not walk the journey I went through. I have time to do that. Helping, veterans be able to heal from their physical pain. So, and really, what a lot of people may have to pour into sports practices and picking up and doing that, that is extra capacity and time that I have. Sometimes it's bittersweet, because on one hand, I'm like, man, but I get to do all these great things with the Lord, and he's partnering with me with all these fun things. And, he always just puts just the most amazing people in front of me. And also, it's like, does it mean the desire goes away, but you get to enjoy and celebrate the pieces of it and just know that the journey is the journey. So I think sometimes it's like, I'm a high lion. So for me, I want to know the destination. What's the destination? But it's like really when you find the joy and the beauty in the journey, sometimes you get so much more. While you feel like you didn't get one, you get so much more in that. So really having a community of women that for me has just one. And I think sometimes they see more in me than I sometimes see, where it's like some of them will like ask me to do things and they're like, yeah, you just light up when you talk about it. They're like, this just like, I'm like, I know I do. It's like, sometimes I forget, because it's like, when we're achievers, we just keep going. But sometimes I'm like, man, I was like, they just really, and I laugh because most of them, like, they don't want to hear me talk about financial planning, because not that it doesn't light me up, but it's just like, it's something I'm good at. I am deeply passionate about family relational health, and I am deeply passionate about obviously helping people heal. So, and inspiring hope through that. So yeah, I'm very thankful for your community. I'm very thankful for John Reinhardt for having the vision to say, hey, come to this with me. And like, I think we've got some people to, and it has, it's just been, I'm even in one of the fellowship groups with a group of women. And it's really great to just be able to be authentically you and not apologize for how the Lord made you.
Well, Christina, what are you most excited about coming on the horizon in the next 5 or 10 years with all the different things you got going on?
Yeah, I would say one is I'm noticing that the younger generation and families all want to be very relational. They all want to be very impactful and very relational. So it's been really fun to see, some of us could, like, especially my parents' generation, my grandma's generation, it was more of like, we don't talk about money. like it's, and differently where, now this younger generation, they're passionate about it. And so really, it's really been fun I'm so excited to see, especially the next 5 to 10 years, watching the next gens really champion their families. Because it's amazing, they're getting grandma and grandpa to the table to talk about discussions that they never have had. So I'm really, really excited to see that continuing to grow, because I'm really starting to see that movement really shift the conversation around just family generosity, and having open conversations, being connected. So it's been really, really fun to see that generation now start to champion. So I think that is going to be really, really a catalyst for generosity in families. So I'm excited to see what they continue to champion with them and be part of it, and bringing them to the table and watching them kind of lead in a different way. That's just been really fun to see. And then I'm also really excited for the journey of Miracle Hope for me. It was never a journey I ever thought I would take, but it's been really excited. For me, like one of my first passion projects is going to be with testing out pulmonary fibrosis and respiratory diseases. And like, for me, just the thought of being able to champion a research study around that and show it, that's just, it's my love letter to Dad. And I should say my whole family, not just Dad, in doing that. So I'm really, really excited just that the Lord's using me in different ways that I never expected, but has just been an absolutely just heartfelt journey.
As we get to the end of our time together, I do want to leave some space for our manager's minute, which is how we wrap up every episode. So this is just a practical action that our listeners can take to step into their role as stewards and to manage God's wealth wisely. Christina, do you have a suggestion for our listeners today?
I think for me is leaving space for spontaneous giving that you were called for. And for me, it usually is. And so I actually keep just some 1s and some 5s and stuff in my car. So for me, it's like I go through, because I started doing giving goals instead of income goals. So with that, I then structure out who am I giving with, but I always leave 10% of my giving goal for spontaneity giving. So sometimes that can even be that because I travel a lot. So a lot of times go to churches in other cities and they'll be doing this great project and the Lord puts it on my heart. So I'm like, great, Lord, what's the number? And I can give. Sometimes it's like I'm just driving and where it's not always, but for some reason there's that person that is on the side of the road that the Lord just sparks me and I just hand them $5, And so for me, it's been really, it's just been really fun because I am so structured in a lot of things that it's like, hey, leaving that space for the spontaneity just reminds me that it's not always planned out, that sometimes the Lord's just going to put on his heart. Like, it's funny. I'm actually where I'm at right now. I remember probably 5 or 6 years ago being here, and there was this family I walked by and I could just feel the Lord just hit my heart, but I was just tired. It was late at night. And I remember it haunted me. You know what I mean? Because I was like, man, I know that was a prompting the Lord put on my heart. And so that's when it actually started, where I was like, okay, I need to have spontaneity of the times when the Lord just wants to say, hey, in this moment, even when it's you're tired, you're, in doing that. But sometimes just to give spontaneity, I have no idea where it goes. I have no idea if they're going to waste it. And it doesn't always have to be calculated. And so that, to me, I think for a lot of people, not planning everything out, but being a little bit for the Lord just to show up in moments when you don't expect. And it brings some fun moments and some fun stories.
Yeah, I love that suggestion. And I agree 100%. It really gives God a lot of room to work, if you want to say it that way. And a lot of cool stories come out of that. Christina, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you so much for sharing some of your time and some of your story with us. And I'm excited to see what God's got on the horizon for you. It seems like every few years he's got a whole new direction to pull you into. So I'm sure there is many more exciting stories to come.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. It has been a blast. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much for listening to the show, guys. If you want to find any references or links from today's show, you can always find them in our show notes at finishlinepledge.com/episode 129. Before we finish up, I have a quick question for you. Have you ever stopped to answer the question, how much is enough? A financial finish line is designed to help you do just that. Our 90-day Finish Line Pledge breaks down the process into 3 easy steps. Step 1, define how much is enough for you and your family to spend in a single month and use that as your monthly spending budget for 90 days. Step 2, as God provides money to manage, set aside any margin outside of your finish line into a separate bank account. And Step 3, after 90 days, explore the many ways you can use that margin you've set aside to create joy, purpose, and impact in God's kingdom. Want to learn more? Check out our website at finishlinepledge.com. That's all we have for today. We'll see you next time.